On today's episode, we learn that the Nazis taking guns away from the Jews wasn't a factor in the Holocaust. Revisit Kyle Rittenhouse getting away with murder. We learn that poverty is caused by rich people, that automation and technological innovations are a giant step backwards for our society, and finally, assert that the deaths of the Uvalde school children are the fault of peaceful gun owners. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds every week, and we kind of show where they've gone wrong, point out some of the underlying assumptions, and try to have a bit of a laugh and some fun along the way. Before we get started, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our show. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts on any of these cringe posts. We'd love to hear it and love to talk with you. And before we get started, we'd like to, kind of poke fun at ourselves, bad past takes, bad past views, because the story of Cringe Posts is that people move on and people get better, and the arc of history bends towards freedom and liberty, and we are examples of that. And today, to drag up something bad from Donnie's past and show how he's improved, we've got a post from September 13th, 2017. And I'll read the first headline. So this was right around when Rand Paul brought up a vote to end the 2001 and 2002 authorization for military force acts. And the Senate voted to table and kill the plan by Rand Paul, and it passed, or it was killed 61 to 36. Most of those came from the Dems, but there were some Republicans that voted for it. And Donald tweeted out, "Freaking Republicans. Also, screw you, Cruz. I thought I could trust you to not muck this vote up." I mean, man, I mean, you were still pretty good, right? You were getting to the point of liberty and stuff, but this is like the remnants of you thought you could trust. Trust a snake in Ted Cruz.
By this point, I'm in deep in liberty. I'm under no disillusions of the idea that Republicans are good. The problem is the former Liberty Republican idea that I believed in, which I think there are a few Republican Liberty Caucus types who still are good. I do believe that exists, but I think unless you are willing to embrace the actual title of like libertarian or like small L libertarian, which even like Rand Paul doesn't say that, but like he doesn't object from the libertarian-ish moniker. Like Ted Cruz only used that in 2016 to try to win votes from liberty folks. But if someone's not really embracing that title and they've been in office for I think he'd been in office for like probably 4 years by that point, 5 years. You should probably be more mistrustful of them, especially when they show their true colors on the campaign trail, saying things like making the sand glow, as he famously said in one of the debates, talking about bombing the Middle East.
Man. Yeah, it's Tom Woods' phrase is that no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain.
I was going to say, who became the real wacko bird in the end? If you remember their John McCain, Ted Cruz tiff, with the John McCain calling Ted Cruz and Rand Paul wacko birds. And which was always just such a goofy, like, wow, got him moment. But of course, Ted Cruz really came to be John McCain. So maybe John McCain was right in the end.
Well, it's kind of like you see these videos, they'll go out on the floor, make their little speech and be mean to each other. And then after it's all said and done, everyone's happy and shaking hands and they're friends again, right? When they leave the camera up after it's all over. And I think that's like kind of the great deception, right? Like these people, like the drama and the infighting and all that stuff it's like part of the job. And it's part of like the vibe they're supposed to get out to you to believe that, oh, you need to be on my side. But at the end of the day, they're all lining their pockets and they're all happy to, as long as it benefits them, more or less help each other. And that's why you see with like all these military things and all the, fun, where most of the money flows into Washington via lobbyists, most of the time, there's bipartisan support for any sort of military action or thing that's going to be done, which really speaks to the integrity of these folks that Cruz is the integrity choice, for the Republicans over Donald Trump.
Well, and who says that actors don't get paid lots of money? Who says that they don't get?
That's true. Yeah.
Come on. Oh, jeez.
Moving on from our past and into the present of other people's tweets, we've got a PolitiFact article by a gal named Samantha Putterman. And this was back in April of 2019, but I saw it being circled around with all of the gun control stuff going on. And the title of the article says, no, comma, gun control regulation in Nazi Germany did not help advance the Holocaust. Now, this one's a pretty easy one to dunk on because it's almost like a priori, right? That if you have someone that's aggressing upon you, being able to have a weapon to defend yourself is something that would halt that person's aggressive advance. But if you look up the Wikipedia article, there's literally a Wikipedia article for Nazi Germany gun control. And they will cite PolitiFact as, a source, and then PolitiFact will cite Wikipedia as a source, which is pretty funny. They have infinite sources between each other. But their argument is that, well, no, actually, gun rights, if you look at it, were being taken away before Nazi Germany happened and Hitler came to power. And while Hitler was in power, he actually expanded gun rights. And then they have a little caveat that's like he used gun rights to selectively give guns to members of the Nazi party, but there were still guns. And it's like, oh, okay. So what you're saying is that this gun control didn't actually get rid of guns. It just made it so that only certain people could have guns and that they could enforce their will on people that didn't have guns. This is kind of more detailed out in there's a guy named Stephen Halbrook, and he has a book called Gun Control in the Third Reich. And he kind of details out all of the different things that happened. And one of the most important quotes I think we can take from this is that Hitler literally said, the foolish thing we could do is to allow the subject races, aka the Jews, to possess weapons. And this is really played out when you look at things like the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, where the Jews literally armed themselves and fought the Germans for, I think it was like 63 days or something like that. It was the longest campaign in internal resistance in World War II. And they did so because they knew that, hey, if we don't do this, we're going to be dragged away and put in the gas chambers or something far worse.
Yeah, I pulled up the article here, and I do love the line in this full Cope breakdown of the quote unquote fact checked. That says the Nazis used the records to confiscate guns from their enemies. But Ellerbrock also said the files included very few of the firearms in circulation, and that many Jewish people and others still managed to stash away weapons into the late 1930s. And it's like, okay, but do you think that would have maybe been they wouldn't have had to stash weapons away if it hadn't been illegal? Do you think that the Jews could have armed themselves freely and openly if a ban like that hadn't happened? Yeah, of course the Nazis, even if they selectively used gun control, that's using gun control to advance a cause of the Holocaust. It's like they're saying it wasn't the sole reason. It wasn't like a total 100% everyone enacted, everyone's guns got taken away. Therefore, it couldn't have contributed. And it's like, no, if the law on the books is that, all new weapons have to be registered, and then you selectively enforce that and you let some people buy weapons, but you don't against another group, that can still advance towards the end of the Holocaust. What you've proved here doesn't at all disprove the idea that it helped. And it quite obviously, the fact that the Jews even had to stash weapons, they couldn't have them openly. Do you think that has a chilling effect on acquiring weapons? To some degree, yeah. You can't openly say, hey, we better arm ourselves, and you're not going to impose these unfair measures against us because we will fight back. If you can't do that openly and you can't purchase them equally like that, of course the government is going to use that, or that's going to make it easier for the government to oppress you if it wants to, and as the German government did eventually. It's a great example of what fact checkers will do in many cases, which is to take one aspect of a bigger claim and then either misrepresent that and then quote unquote disprove it, or say because this one aspect doesn't prove the entire claim, therefore the entire claim is false, even though you're not looking at the broader picture and all of the details surrounding. So, it's like me saying things like, man, it's June right now. It's June and it's dumping rain outside, which is so annoying because it's going to make the grass grow taller really quickly again, and I'm going to have to go mow the lawn. And then someone coming in with a fact check and say, actually, if it only rained all the time, the grass wouldn't be able to grow because it wouldn't have adequate sunlight. And it's like, yes, but you need the rain as a part of it to also the sunlight. Yeah, that is a foregone
given
part.
reality.
That's part of it.
Yeah,
exactly,
given reality.
Yes. Like, there will be sun, and therefore this rain is going to make the grass grow faster. So it's just one of those things where they just isolate an aspect of it that they can, again, quote unquote, disprove the entire claim based on. But it's like you're not presenting the whole context and the whole case.
Yeah, and I think if someone is deluded enough to ignore even just Nazi Germany, it's like, well, this aspect of disarming the populace that you seek to subjugate is a feature of every authoritarian regime out there, right? You don't see common citizens that are enslaved in North Korea able to carry guns. You don't see during apartheid in South Africa, you don't see the people that are being subjugated able to get guns easily and arm themselves. The Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, all these places had mass disarmament. And then you think about, a place where they tried to disarm, but it didn't work out. You think about the very beginning of the Revolutionary War, right? The very first battle, Lexington and Concord, the British literally came and said, "Hey, you villains, toss down your guns. We need to confiscate them because we're scared of you guys being able to declare independence from us and having the ability to fight us back." And obviously, everyone had everything prepared and was able to fight back, and they had their weapons. So it's like, a little colony on the other side of the world was able to take on at that time the foremost power in the whole world, and the foremost power is threatened right by those guns that were there. So even it's just crazy to me that people even take this at face value, because it just flies in the face of common sense, which is very 1984-esque, right? Don't believe the evidence of your own eyes.
One little preview I'll give you, because I've got a really good cringe post. It was deleted probably minutes after it was tweeted out, and it's an article from Salon, and they changed the headline. And it's a little bit different of an aspect, but it's about this very scenario, which is to say, look at California and Governor at the time, Ronald Reagan, disarming black people and enacting, because he was scared of the Black Panthers who came in to the legislature and toted weapons to sort of say, hey, we black people have been tread upon. We've been treated as second-class citizens. You need to take us seriously. And then gun control got enacted immediately. The headline for next week will sort of take in a different direction because it is very rich, but there's a little sneak preview of that. But it demonstrates the point as well, where it's kind of the inverse of it, right? Where because of a subsect, gun control was enacted broadly and everyone lost rights, but it was done out of a basically racist motivation, which is to say, you don't enact gun control measures unless you want to disarm a broader population and a broader populace because you are scared. And again, at the end of the day, whether or not you think it is a good policy, if the claim is gun control didn't help advance the Holocaust, that's just demonstrably false from everything that we've listed here. But in addition, in this idea that even if you're only worried about a subset of people, you can enact gun control broadly and then enforce it selectively in order to help advance your eventual agenda, which in this case was the Holocaust.
Great point. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a series of tweets. The first one, it's not as cringe, and the person writes, "The DUI charges against Paul Pelosi were dropped despite the fact that drunk driving kills more children than AR-15s. To give some background on it, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, was caught driving under the influence. It's still kind of, no one's really sure whether the charges were dropped or not. I have a feeling that he'll probably get off a lot better than you or I would if we were driving. I think that's another a priori thing in a way for like this thing. Those in power are able to have benefits that us who are not in power are able to have. A person tweets a follow up to it. The real point is, why were they dropped? DUI cases are pretty standard. Did he blow over the limit? You get charges. Did he not? Then what was he arrested for? Don't be distracted by the AR-15 part of this tweet. Why did he get the charges dropped? And then the true cringe of this whole thing, replying to both of these folks, this lady tweets out, "Why did Rittenhouse get away with murder?" question mark, double exclamation point, question mark. As if she's making some mind-blowing point. It's like, you know what? Even if Rittenhouse did get away with murder, he didn't. He was in self-defense. But if what he did was murder, that still doesn't negate the fact that Paul Pelosi was driving under the influence, right? It's like, it's such a weird. I actually ended up following this lady on our profile because she posts a spew of really not good things, and it's a good source of cringe. So looking forward to having her on our show a little bit more. But yeah, like if anyone, it's crazy to me that Rittenhouse, I think, happened in 2020, right? So it's been 2 years now coming up on, and people still haven't watched the video where Rittenhouse is run down by a mob. A guy takes a skateboard to his head, and another guy pulls a pistol out, aims it at his head, and only after all that happens does Rittenhouse actually fire, right? He fired once in the beginning because a guy was chasing him down. A charged and convicted pedophile was chasing him down and threatening to kill him. So he shoots then he flees because the mob is starting to get out of control, and then they chase him down. It's a crazy video. If you ever can watch it, like, you should just Google it if you can stomach that sort of thing, because the guy's running on the street towards the line of cops who are just standing there doing nothing, and he's got this mob of people chasing this kid. I think he was like 16 or 17 at the time, and they just attack him blatantly, right? Like it's the clearest. It's the clearest evidence of self-defense I've ever seen. It's all caught on video. We have the receipts, as they say.
I love the whataboutisms that miss the point entirely, where, you know, whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse got away with murder, it doesn't change the fact, not only that you pointed out, of Paul Pelosi still, you know, getting off in this, it also doesn't change the literal fact about drunk driving killing more children than AR-15s, you know? Literally nothing that her point brings out interacts with the original tweet in any way, shape, or form. You could try to call, you could contest this guy's tweet in a multiple ways. You could say something like, why are you concerned about Paul Pelosi, his charges being dropped for something that's not as malicious as, say, Rittenhouse getting away with murder? Even if you tied it in there, you're at least giving some level of comparison point to say, why in this case, where it is more pernicious or vile, why is this one dropped, and why are you focusing on the one that's not as important or whatever? She doesn't even do that. She just brings up this example out of thin air. And of course, the thing to me that's also crazy is just to, like, of all things, like, DUIs are so easy to avoid. Like, there's nothing about a DUI where you can look at the situation and think, well, maybe there's room for disagreement on this. It's like, in 99% of cases, like, unless you are, I don't know, being chased by a murderer and you're already drunk and you're getting in a car to get away from that murderer, like, there's no reason why you should be anywhere near operating a vehicle out of your own personal, discipline and morals should guide you in that way. Whereas with the Rittenhouse case, it's like, you can disagree, but at the very least, you can argue that, like, okay, yeah, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of violence going on. Maybe you think he shouldn't have shown up there with a rifle to begin with. That's fine. But even then, it's like, there's property to defend. So there's a purpose. There's a reason for it. There's no reason for a DUI. That a DUI is, in many respects, kind of just the most selfish of these kinds of, crime, which, again, I don't want to equate the law to morality necessarily, but it just of different things that you can do that sort of endanger people. A DUI is literally just selfish, whereas bringing a rifle to the scene, you can debate whether or not it was warranted, but there's at least reasons that can exist, and I think in Rittenhouse's case, justifiably are there for him to bring a weapon to the scene and for him to have shot those people, and obviously he was acquitted. Then that's the other crazy thing, is the charges weren't dropped against Rittenhouse. He went through the full extent of the judicial system, whereas Paul Pelosi will not even see that if these charges are in fact dropped. He's not going to have to go before a judge in a meaningful way, or a jury, let's say, he's not going to have every ounce of evidence reviewed by an entire nation. And multiple days of trial in the same way that the jury had to decide over the Rittenhouse case. So even still, it's like the comparison point there is way weighted towards Rittenhouse being justified and Paul Pelosi not being justified.
Yeah, it's the there's that NPC meme, which is I support the current thing, and like this lady for some reason accidentally reverted back to a previous software version, like she just glitched out. I remember when Rittenhouse got acquitted, declared innocent, and I had friends on my feed, man, that they were like, man, what a dark day in America. We let a murderer get off. It's like, did you watch the trial? Did you watch the video? Did you hear the evidence? Like, none of it. The best argument that even the prosecutor could make was that it was manslaughter, right? They couldn't even make the case that it was any sort of murder or premeditated or anything like that. They could only say that it was manslaughter and that he was negligent in bringing that over. That's what they're trying to get, because that was the only one that they even had a slight shot at. But murder, like, these people don't watch the news. They just read a headline, or they hear what everyone else that has the same operating NPC system has, and then they just like, okay, well, copy paste, I'm going to do that too. It's like, man, we owe it to ourselves to at least care about the truth, right? And I hope that this lady at some point realizes that she should care about that, kind of like we've realized by going through our past posts. It's like, there were times I did not care about the truth. I just cared about what I thought would make me look good, or I cared about what other people were saying, or looking good to a certain person, or looking educated by having a fancy opinion. And people can grow out of it, but we have to reinstall truth as the thing that is the most important in our speech and in our thought processes.
Agreed.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got an image meme, which, by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier. If you are just listening to this podcast, go to cringepost.com. We've got a show companion that shows these memes and pictures and cringe posts, and you can check it out there. And this post, this picture writes, "Poverty exists not because we cannot feed the poor, but because we cannot satisfy the rich." And I remember I had an adult tell me when I was a kid, he's like, look, there's enough food in the whole wide world to feed everyone. Everyone's just too selfish to let people do that. And like, that guy, he was supposed to be a really smart person. And it reminded me when I saw that, and I thought of that past example of, I think it was earlier this year or beginning of, or later last year, when the United States secretary guy basically said, man, like, we could solve world hunger with $6 billion. And Elon Musk said, all right, I'll give you $6 billion, but you've got to give me an accounting of how you're going to spend every single dollar. And then the UN never gave him an accounting statement of how they were going to spend it, because it's not about money, and it is not about resources being stacked one place or the other. It's the fact that there are logistical challenges about how you get food and resources from one place to another that can't just be solved by money, right? Like, they are solved culturally, they're solved by production. People think that, oh, we should just like spend money and airdrop food into Africa. It's like, that's not sustainable. That doesn't work. Food has to be produced in these places that are poor. The only way that you ever can escape sort of poverty all around is by producing more, not reallocating. At least if you want it to be sustainable and something that continues to last.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made the point, and obviously it's not a point original to us, of the Thomas Sowell quote that, it's like, why is there wealth is the question. When you're saying why is there poverty, that's not the question. It should be, why is there wealth? And I think that I don't know if this is necessarily the case. It is my inclination, at least, but I feel like so much of this comes from people having been born in an era where there is plenty, or there was, people were able to grow into there being plenty, right? Like, even if a lot of these boomers were born into maybe like lower-ish income, they lived in a world where there was, room to grow. And now we're in the generation when the boomers kind of squandered everything to some degree. And like you look at the not just the boomers either, right? The Septuagints in power in Congress and stuff have been with us forever, and they're holding on to all this, and we're into recessions, or a recession in '08 and one's on the horizon here, and all these kinds of things. And it's like people think, oh, it's just those greedy corporations, because before, we were able to grow into this. Now, we didn't have a healthy economy then. And they just took advantage of kind of the long bluff game that the government does. And so coming up in an era where you think that there is just unlimited resources. I mean, like from anyone who grew up middle income or higher, in our generation too, it's like as far as you're aware, like food just exists in grocery stores, like the Fred Meyer is a fact of life, or the Kroger or whatever it is near you. And so it's like, it's very easy to think, well, there's enough food for the world to be around, just because you've lived in an era of unprecedented wealth. But that's not the default state of things. You don't, you don't just wake up and have grocery markets that have food waiting for you to pick up ready. That's all because of human action and because of effort people have put in to create that value from what was decay. And so poverty is this very, very natural thing that miraculously through free market exchange, we've, taken a sledgehammer to, as it were.
Yeah, it's people don't understand, like another Elon Musk quote, I guess, on this. He was on Joe Rogan, and he's like, people don't get that unless you make stuff, there is no stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like stuff has to be made, and has to be made in a place where it's sustainable. Like you think about In-N-Out Burger. The reason there's no In-N-Out Burger in Washington State, and it's only throughout California, is because they have a rule for them to meet the quality of their food. Restaurants can only be, I think it's like 16 hours away from the place where the ingredients are produced. Right. And that's like a preference thing, but there is still some truth to it. Like food goes bad over time, right? You can't just fly food from here, transport in mass quantities that feed millions or hundreds of millions of people to places that are impoverished. You actually have to have people there producing things. And that's the only way things get better. And that's done through innovation, through technological advances, through business, and the freedom to be able to create and produce. And so by that measure, anything that is the enemy of production, the enemy of free enterprise, is the enemy of human flourishing. And coincidentally, the policies that people that hold this view that this meme have generally advocate for policies that are the enemy of production, aka human flourishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about what stuff like refrigeration did for food and for the elimination of the idea of poverty, where fruit used to be like a delicacy. And the idea of having certain kinds of fruits in states that they were not native to was unthinkable. Being able to have access to oranges in the winter, or excuse me, not the winter, but like in a region that had no humidity or warmth, like a Dakota, like that seemed like that would never be a thing. And then refrigeration came around, and suddenly you were able not only to preserve food for yourself, but you were able to preserve food for travel and spread. And that means that you can not only have greater quantities of food variety, which is a great benefit, but you can also have food varieties that can now last longer, and people can stockpile, and it can mean that you can buy things in bulk, which means you can buy them cheaper, because when you have one kind of thing, you can grow more. It's easier to grow more, so it can be sold for less, the more you buy of that thing. And so all these wonderful things because of the advent of refrigeration. And so again, and you and I would correctly posit that those kinds of technological advances happen the most frequently when there are incentives for them to exist, and through free voluntary exchange and stuff like that. But let's take the position of one of the cringe posts from our last episode and say that technology just happens anyway, no matter what the system is. Well, but the point being that time would need to pass regardless for this to happen, for refrigeration to develop. The default state was not having access to refrigeration, Yep. And so at best, this meme is ignorant in the sense that the time preference is wrong to say, well, if technology and science are just constantly on the move, then don't worry. Poverty won't exist for much longer because the rich won't be able to not be satisfied. There will be too much for them to be able to spill over, sort of a thing. If human ingenuity is just always on the trend upward, but at worst, of course, the policies they want to enact actively hinder that from happening and put a damper on things that would otherwise spark the innovations that create more and, again, provide more things for the poorer in society. Because, again, it's like think about how ridiculous the idea of we can't satisfy the rich, therefore there's poverty is when you think about something like the existence of fast food. It's like, a super rich person, they benefit from fast food existing if they own the chain and stuff like that. But it's not like they're like, oh, yes, now I can go and eat all of the Big Macs that are there and I'm going to deprive the poor from like the existence of fast food helps the poor. Maybe it's not the healthiest, but it gets calories, and that's absolutely better than nothing. It provides a lot of value in that way. And it has nothing to do with the rich being satisfied or not. Very few rich people, unless they, don't take themselves super seriously, which is kind of refreshing. But most rich people probably are very snobby about the food they eat and wouldn't really care to get fast food every day anyway. So they're not taking that away from that by any means.
Well, and to that point, right? Like, fast food is not the healthiest thing in the world, obviously, and you would be remiss to eat it all the time. But there's never been a point in history where you could probably work for about 30 minutes and you could afford a day's worth of calories, right? Like that is what capitalism has done, is that you can work 30 minutes, and in that 30 minutes, you generate enough value that you're able to purchase a whole day's worth of calories. That's how efficient our system is. 300 years ago, you used to have to work all day in order to generate enough calories for you to survive. Now it's down to 30 minutes, and now you can focus on other things that you want to purchase or do. And again, not the healthiest thing, but that mass production cascades to healthier foods, right? It's cheaper now, like you were saying, it's cheaper now than ever. I can get avocados at any time of the year. And they're fresh and great because the global supply chain enables people to grow them anywhere in the world and ship them here, and they're still good once they get here. And I can buy it for, a couple bucks a piece, which is expensive, but it's still great. Like, I can do that. You used to never be able to do that.
Absolutely right.
Speaking of fast food, we got our next cringe post by Blake Masters, and I believe he Senate candidate.
I believe that's correct. Yes,
Blake Masters.
I believe he is a Senate.
Yeah, Senate candidate in Arizona, endorsed by Trump, a Republican, and he tweeted out, "The McDonald's in Marianna, I don't know how to pronounce it, Arizona, got rid of human cashiers. Your only option is the self-serve kiosk. Giant step backwards for our society. Takes like 20 minutes to order $57 of food. Parentheses, a quarter pounder burger, not a meal, is $6.50 in Joe Biden's economy. Bring back the humans." And it's a picture of someone working on the touchscreen. I don't think I want to have a senator elected that it takes him 20 minutes to navigate through a user interface that was specifically curated to order food.
Exactly.
I hope he's joking, and I think he is, but maybe he is that dumb. I wouldn't be surprised either. I've used these kiosks. They're wonderful, man. I love using these kiosks because, one, it eliminates human error. I know that what is shown on the screen at the end is what I want, and I can do all the customizations, and everything is great. The first time I used it was in Lisbon in Portugal, and it was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. It's actually faster because you can have more of these kiosks than you can have people. And so you could have like 10 of these kiosks in a restaurant. And so if there's a big influx of people, everything works great. And just like I said, the ability to customize it is awesome. And I know that this contributes to cost-saving measures as well. For him to say that this is a giant step backwards is just, in what way, man? Like, was the invention of Excel, was that a giant step backwards because now you don't actually have people, you don't have to have a whole room full of people doing math on paper? I talked with this guy who was an actuary. He calculates risk for insurance companies, and he's been doing it for 60 years. And he's like, yeah, back, before Excel, you would have a room and you would literally lay out 50 people, like a 25 by 25 grid, like in Excel, and they would pass sheets to each other as they did math. And he's like, once Excel was invented, that whole room was down to one person. Is that a step backward or is that a step forward? It sounds like a ginormous step forward to me.
Yeah, I laugh too, because one of the other aspects of people who are I don't even know what you call this. It's like being a Luddite, I suppose. One of the funniest aspects of it is the fact that even if you removed these specific machines, as they really, really are keen to do, guess what? This is replicated on every single human smartphone now. If you have a smartphone, which more and more is also something where prices are dropping and becoming more available, you can get a decent smartphone and for like $200-$300 now. Believe it or not, there are some high quality phones that can be that their budget, but that's the point. You can download the McDonald's app and you do it there. And so it's like, oh great, we ban these kiosks, so now you don't order inside. Okay, everyone's just going to order on their phone anyway. I mean, frankly, that's what I do every time, because it's like I can order from home and then I can drive out, park, and have them take it out to me, or go through the drive-through, and it's a lot quicker. The order goes into their queue early, so they know when to make it, because they'll detect when my car's up. All these things, and it's like, so it's just one of those things where you can see sort of the law of unintended consequences coming through once more, because the government tries to ban something like these kiosks, and oops, technology finds a way, and it just slips through through a different avenue, through the app or whatever. So no matter what you do, when you try to roll back literal technological progress and things like that, it's just kind of futile. It proves just how often your objective of, we're gonna stop this thing through this policy of banning something, it's just so laughably stupid. And I think this guy's relatively, he's not ancient, he's relatively young, but it is funny because you think about, if this candidate here is this disconnected to think that, well, man, maybe he's just placating his sort of voter base. I guess that's also possible. But if he's, let's take him at his face value here. If he's as disconnected to think that banning these kinds of self-serve kiosks prevents the adoption of self-serve features through phones and things like that, just imagine how disconnected the Septuagint, who's been in Congress for 60 years, literally is from reality.
That is a brutal point. Did you see that Jimmy Kimmel interview with Joe Biden?
No.
That sounds like it's really bad, man. It's like, my grandmother near the end of her life had dementia, and it literally reminded me of like conversations I'd have with her. Bless her heart, she was a great woman. And Joe Biden is an awful person. Way different, but he's not doing well, man. I'll send you a clip after, because it's pretty funny. But this protectionist kind of thing, like, Republicans have this in their. It's one of the more cringy aspects of Republicans. Republicans are spineless and do bad things regardless, but their actual like platform that they are proud of, this is an aspect that I really dislike, and it reminds me of I think it was like 2008 or 2009. Obama did that, because tire and rubber workers were losing their jobs. He imposed tariffs on China, and to the tune of I can't remember what it was, but I remember that that it cost about $900,000 was the cost per job saved. I think he saved like 1,200 jobs in the United States, but he spent and created $900,000 in cost per job. And it's like, man, to protect a job that maybe paid, somewhere, let's even say it paid $250,000, right? Like, for that person to keep their job, you invested, $700,000, $650,000 to, why didn't you just give that to the person? Like, it would have been better that way. And that's the price of protectionism. Protectionism just makes it worse off for everyone else. It's a black hole of money and resources that's spent in to make things slower. There's nothing good about it whatsoever.
To be clear, obviously you and I wouldn't advocate for, giving someone $900,000 for their salary just in the name of, protectionism. But if you are, and again, I don't blame the average person, the average non-politician, conservative Republican, for these views, because I think they're being told them all the time, and they might even try to think through them. I blame the people in power who are actually enacting these things. But if you're thinking through this and you're like, well, I support the idea of protecting these jobs and trades and tariffs so that we don't get taken advantage of by other countries, and then you see a stat like this, the onus is now on you to tell me why you shouldn't have shouldn't make that a welfare program instead of the protectionist. And that's the thing is, at the end of the day, a lot of Republican values kind of end up circling into big government programs like welfare. So they claim to sort of be against welfare unless it comes to things like corn subsidies because it affects their state in Iowa, or in this case, they're against big government until it comes to the case of protecting jobs from outside countries. But again, in effect, you've now spent $900,000 to protect a job. So you've wasted that amount of money that would have literally been more effective as a welfare program, which is notoriously ineffective and bad.
Yep. Yeah. Which we don't like. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I'd be very angry about that as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it would still be more effective than the protectionist stuff. At least, what was it? It was, at least we'd have a big hole, if we dug it. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a photo grid of all of the children that were killed in Uvalde, and the caption of this meme writes, "They died so you could keep your assault rifle." And I'm pretty sure the person and the people that post these things, they probably have some sort of clothing item from H&M. Maybe they wear a diamond ring from somewhere, or maybe they drive a car or own a smartphone made with components from China or something like that. And those people contribute more to children deaths than the manufacturers of the assault rifle, Daniel Defense, which manufactures most of their parts here in the United States. This is such a disingenuous and almost borderline evil take to say that people that manufactured assault rifles, people that own assault rifles and not even assault rifle, an AR-15. I'm not going to even use their terminology because it's not correct. But people that manufacture and own AR-15s peacefully, which is basically everyone that owns an AR-15, is responsible for these kids' deaths. There's no direct tie to me owning something and someone else deciding to use the same thing that I own a different way than myself and everyone else chooses to do so. It's kind of like medical malpractice and misprescribed drugs kill tens of thousands of more people than gun violence does in the United States. Yeah, I don't go say to someone, hey, your right to use the doctor literally killed these children or killed these people. I don't go tell someone that like, hey, we have X amount of people that get raped every year, so therefore you must cut off, your male appendage, even though you've never, done anything like that in your life. It's just such a disingenuous and awful thing to lump people in with that. And like I was saying, the strongest argument is that the production of these things results in people being hurt, but it doesn't. And in fact, that applies to most of the consumable things that a lot of the people posting this consume themselves.
This is gonna seem like I'm coming out of a weird angle to address this, but if you take a lot of steps back and you look at what particularly is happening on sort of the cultural front from the left, I think this has started a lot with the breakdown of language and the idea of solidifying a stable meaning of truth. So a lot of the times, people, generally speaking, more conservatively minded people are sticklers for things like literal definitions of words and agreed upon terms and meanings and things like that. That's not always the case, but generally speaking. And I think we've seen a continued push towards things like, well, you can't define one term to mean the same thing for every person because their experience is different, right? And there's been this continued push in that direction. And I think that has worked in its way so that now culturally, people who are in charge of things like media and entertainment for children and public schools, they can reroute language to mean new things and to match new truths. Okay, I'm almost back onto this here. And I think that has led to the concentrated effort on rerouting the definition of violence about what is and isn't violence. When you have things like microaggressions coming up in the common culture to say, oh, if he says, in America, if you work hard, you will be successful, that's a microaggression. To equate that to any form of aggression equates it to violence. To equates it to violence can mean literally not violence. Violence means he said things or thought things that were maybe aggressive or harmful or hurtful to me. And then you can then take, okay, so if violence happens without violence happening, then you can assign automatic guilt to things and to people because you don't need to demonstrate that they themselves have done the actual act of violence, because the violence has taken place by the act that is not an actual action of violence, but in this new definition of violence of either saying something harmful or thinking. And this is what you see with the critical race theory ideas, where the white people are the aggressors. You have your father's guilt for the crimes your forefathers committed. By the very nature of your skin color, you are racist. It doesn't matter if you've taken any actions that are or aren't. It's where is the racism, not is there racism. And I think that it bleeds into this cultural thing where it's, if you are a gun owner, you contribute to gun violence. Or if you support the right of ownership of guns, you murdered those children, or you are culpable for that. And so it's one of those things where I think on a literal policy level, you obviously need to fight and disprove things with facts. You need to disprove things statistically and with detail, but you also need to attack the culture rot that allows for things like this to be taken seriously at all. This idea, they died so that you could keep yourself, this should be laughed out. I mean, nothing about it's funny, it's tragic, but you know what I mean. Like the argument that is being made is so incredibly just vapid and dishonest and stupid. It shouldn't be considered in anyone's mind. The most ardent gun control supporter should see this and think, okay, that's not, like, we don't want this person on our side. They're making us look bad. That's how it should be perceived. But the cultural rot has happened so much that I think we've gotten to a point where there is no, we're in a post-truth world, which I think a lot of people have acknowledged. And I'm not the first person to acknowledge or say that. And we have been in for some time. But I think that it comes into play into things like this where you can only rely on data points so long before they restructure the entire idea of what a data point is. And that's why I think you see success with Matt Walsh's "What is a Woman?" They're restructuring definitions of things, and they can't come to literal definition of things. And so this whole argument's premise is you are guilty for something you did not commit, because in order to be guilty, you don't have to commit something now under the new definition of violence.
That's funny. Did you watch it yet?
I still haven't. I'm going to. I'm planning on it, but
it's funny, man, because in it, he get basically every leftist on there. He asked them at the end, "What is a woman?" And basically they use the term woman to define what a woman is each and every single time. And then once he pushes back, he's like, because they'll say something like, well, it's anyone who identifies as a woman. And you say, but what is that? And they're like, the only true-ish answer that's actually genuine is a person on the street says, well, it's whatever they want it to be,
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's indicative of what you're talking about, is that we have, like you're saying, we've debased truth so far from ourselves that it's truth only exists inside of what we want. And so if we want gun control, or I want the other side to suffer in some way, then my truth is that these kids died so that I feel bad, and these kids died so that you could keep what you want and your side has what it wants. And so they can literally make any big emotional feeling your fault, right? Despite whatever facts or logic or actual realities exist around the tragedy. Even if it is, even if gun control could solve and stop these kids from being killed in Uvalde, this is still not a good argument to make, right? Like,
Yep.
it's not like this kid. I received my assault rifle, according to this person, assault rifle in the mail, and someone came up to me and said, "No, I'm going to take it from you." And then this kid, I was like, "No," and I force push a kid in front of me to take the brunt of whatever type of force is trying to be used to take that right. That's not how it is, right? Like, no, it has no bearing on what actually transpired there. The only bearing it has on how these people feel. And we've seen it in a bunch of posts in the past few weeks, where people will confuse an outcome that they want to have happen and the whether or not you think something was bad or not or shouldn't have happened with the specific policy that they want to have enacted. And so it's like, well, if you don't want there to be abortion, that must mean you want to kill all women or you want all women enslaved. It's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And it's really disingenuous. And what's the scary part, right, is like these type of arguments used to only be made by people who knew they were disingenuous. Now they're being made by people who don't know they're disingenuous and actually think that they are making a point that changes the world, or that's going to get you in some way. And it's truly a virtue signal of spinning your wheels in one place and not really getting anywhere, and you're just kicking up dirt and making everyone look stupid.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm so skeptical of when people say things like, "Well, we will win because the courts will determine that the facts are true," or something. And more and more that's becoming irrelevant because the people who are getting into these positions of power are being raised on this idea of malleable truth. And, I
mean, Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Like,
well, yeah,
that should have been thrown out right away. But because of the media, frothing it all up and all of the outrage, it's like, well, I guess we got to take it to trial. And it's like, no, that's not how it works.
Well, and in that case, he was acquitted, thank God. But it's like, how long is it before the judge is someone who's been raised in this, and so the idea of equal application of the law is replaced with the idea of, well, contextual application of the law, because we need to make sure that we're understanding where each of the people have come from, and we need to see how the law has impacted their lives growing up. And so, maybe this person, he's had privilege his whole life, and so we need to hold him to a stricter standard of what is and isn't. How long is it before the judge feels that way? How long is it before all of the members of the jury feel that way? So I don't like this default assumption that things like data will be proven right if you just uncover it. It's like, you got to uncover the data because you got to have the truth on your side for sure, and you have to know what truth is, but you also have to convince the culture that truth exists and that truth is a thing.
Yeah.
And that's a much bigger claim. And maybe I don't know if Dave Smith would necessarily disagree with this, or maybe I'm taking his claim a little bit different. But he often talks about cultural issues as distractions, and I don't necessarily agree. Like when you talk about things like the transgender bathroom issue, I agree in the sense that politicians use them as distractions to get away with things that they don't want to talk about or focus on, like bombing other countries or bailing themselves out. I think that they're distractions in that sense. But in the bigger picture, I don't think they're distractions in the sense that as a culture, if you aren't cohesive in these things like truth, then it doesn't matter if you abolish the government, because you are going to have a cultural tyranny of people who don't want to define truth. And so when you have things that are, like free exchange and stuff, that can't exist when you're not operating on the similar playing field of, well, it's not stealing if you're white because you stole my land from my forefathers, right? If you don't have the agreed upon even definitions of what is aggression, what is violence, and those kinds of things, it doesn't matter if you abolish the government, a new government props up. And so in that sense, I diverge from Dave Smith a little bit. I don't think these cultural touchstone issues are all distractions. I think they are more like symptoms of the rot that needs to be fixed. And frankly, more liberty-minded people need to be addressing the culture in that way, not just the political issue, too.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. And you and I talked about it a little bit last time. It's just like, yeah, we do everything. We get the button that says government doesn't exist anymore and we live in a truly free society, and you push it. You're going to have to be pushing it again very soon if people aren't going to be virtuous or have any sort of basis for truth. And I think a lot of liberty-minded and libertarian folks confuse the government enforcement of morals with like just actual like defense and offensive morals, where it's like, no, we should advocate for standards, right?
Yeah.
I just don't think that the government or that should be done at the point of a gun for some of these things. I think we should be able to talk with each other and persuade each other. Unfortunately, the government most of the time steps in and makes it impossible to do that. So,
well, I was going to say, I think if you put it at the end of a barrel, as we've been, examples in this episode have shown, unintended consequences happen. So it doesn't end up working out.
Yes. Yeah. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us for this show. If we said anything that made you cringe, or if you have any posts that you would like us to kind of riff off of next time, be sure to send them our way, and we'll catch you next time.